This is a Conn family production, produced by Philip Conn, starring Philip Conn, directed by Rachel Conn. Hi Dennis, I'm sorry to greet you dressed like this. I did intend to put on a dinner suit, but it's nearly 30 degrees here, and I wanted to get it done. So, you wanted to know about Zeta, and quite right too. As the eldest son of the eldest son, I was the one who saw a lot of Zeta. First of all, they came up from London in the early 1940s to avoid the Blitz, and they stayed with us in Bolton for 2 or 3 months. I remember that I had measles when Bubba was there, and she had me on her lap all day. Then, as I'll tell you, I used to go and stay with them when they lived in Wellington Road in Bushhill Park. But let's start at the beginning. Any research which you want to do into Zeta is difficult because we don't know his bloody name. As far as we can gather, his name was something like Scootsy, composed entirely of consonants, something like S-K-C-Y, C-Y, something like that. Now you can see that when he came over, he would be asked his name. Now, all these immigrants were prepared to answer the questions, even though they didn't really understand them. But they would obviously be taught to answer, what's your name? He would say Scootsy. What's the next question? How do you spell it? Well, he doesn't understand the question, never mind being able to spell it. And so he became David Cohen, because all Jews were called Cohen. So that's how we became Cohen. My father, Conn, Sammy Line, and so forth. The best way of attacking the research would be through Bubba's family, who were Blonder, B-L-O-N-D-E-R, and her father had, by repute, a substantial bakery in the Jewish quarter of Warsaw. So, one of the things that I blame myself for is I never asked Zeta about his family. He never spoke about them. And when I realized that very late on, I talked to Lily about it. And she didn't know, even whether he had any siblings. It was really quite extraordinary. Nobody had any idea about Zeta's family. But he was very proud of being the son-in-law of Bubba's family. Apparently they treated him very well. So, Zeta was trained as a master bootmaker in Warsaw, and he fell in love with Sarah. It was a great marriage, I think a very physical marriage, and a very happy marriage. It was a real love match, and he was accepted by her family, even though he probably had nothing. But he was a nice guy, he was a good-looking guy, and they knew he would look after her. They got married, were very happy for a very short time, and my father was born on the 7th of May 1904. And in December 1904, Zeta got his calling up papers from the Russian army. In those days, Poland was part of Russia, The Poles hated the Russians hated the Poles, as they do to this day. When you went in the Russian army, you were in for 25 years. You were paid a pittance when you were paid. Zeta said that to be a Pole in the Russian army was terrible. To be a Jewish Pole in the Russian army was twice as terrible. And to be a Jewish Pole in the Russian army when they were at war was madness. This was the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. You can Google it. Through Bubba's father, they arranged for him to desert, and he walked over the Urals right down into Hamburg. He told me all about it many times when I was a little boy. I never ceased to love him telling the story. He was a great raconteur. He was the sort of raconteur who never actually finished a story, but one story took him on to another. But when he told the story of his escape and his walk over the Urals, he was there. He was right there, living it. One of the stories that he told about that was everybody had peklach. Nobody had luggage. Nobody had suitcases. I'm not even sure that suitcases as such had been invented in those days. Sort of Gladstone bags, yes, but nobody had anything like that. They had peklach, which were basically stuff in brown paper and string or rope. There was a young woman with a young child in the group that he was with, and she asked him if he would carry one of her peklach, and he did. And going up the side of a particularly steep part of the mountain, he dropped it. And he described it bouncing down the mountainside. And every time he told it, it was exactly the same wording. And he was there watching it bounce down. It was quite dramatic to a young boy. He came into Hamburg. The Germans couldn't wait to see the East Juden off. He went into a warehouse where he stayed overnight. They gave him a 10-shilling note and packed him off on the train. On the ferry, he thought he was going to America. Of course, he was quickly disabused of that. He always intended to go to America. All the Jews intended to go to America because every fool knew that the streets were paved with gold. He got to America, he got to London, and he came off the train and was welcomed by some crooked landslide who took him, having asked what he did, took him to a shoe factory where, for the privilege of sleeping by the bench, he worked for up to 16 hours a day. My father used to say that he got his first bed as half of the matrimonial bed of a fellow immigrant whose wife had gone off with another fellow. Zeta never admitted it, never denied it, and he laughed when my father told it. So I've always assumed it was true. One way and another, he made his way out. And he then arranged for Bubba to come over with my father comparatively soon. So I guess that her father put up the money. And they came and eventually to live in Hoxton. Hoxton was then the most ghastly slum, and he would be amazed to see it today. where it's a very chic area. They then had children: Harry, Johnny, Jack, Sammy, Hetty and Lily, in that order. All the boys had boxing medals, which I was given to play with as a little boy. Why did they have boxing medals? Johnny, the most gentle of men, because they had to defend themselves against the yobbos who lived there. There were a few Jews came to live in that area, and they formed a little shul, and they had nowhere to meet. And the only place they could think of was the Salvation Meeting Hall. And Zayda and one or two of the others went to see the Salvation commanding officer, explained the problem, and he said, certainly, have it for the high holy days. And they said, well, we have to tell you I haven't got much money. And he said, I don't want any money. It's God's work. And he did pretty well. And he had a problem. He had a great problem. He didn't believe in education. He must have been one of the few Jewish immigrants of his generation who didn't believe in education. He believed in learning a trade. It was all about earning a living. And so, when my father got to 16, to the primary, to the secondary level, his teachers wanted him to continue and to go to a grammar school or the equivalent of a sixth form college. And they actually came to see Zayda, and he absolutely refused. And my father would have made the world's greatest accountant, but he didn't. And he became a salesman. And he actually joined Zayda. And they had 2 or 3 shops. And they were doing pretty well until the Great Depression of 1929. And Zayda went broke. And the shops had to go. My father went to work in Southampton, where my mother came from. They found a job there, and they found somewhere to live there. And Zayda got White Hart Lane, which he bought in March 1932 for £55. That would be the business. Obviously, there would be a lease. And he worked on the ground floor, and they lived on the upper 2 floors. And I went to stay there as a young boy. It was halfway between the railway station and Spurs football ground. And when I was a little boy, the trains used to keep me awake. And but I remember great meals. All the children round, because most of them were single in those days still, and huge quantities of chicken and huge numbers of little bottles of mineral waters, crushes, this sort of thing. And I remember Bubba being at least 2 courses behind at all times. They were happy days, and they were happy. We went to live in Bolton, and as I said at the beginning, they came to stay with us. They were bombed out of somewhere where they had lived after White Hart Lane, and they went back to White Hart Lane.
Just you've skipped a bit there. So you're in Southampton.
Yes.
Your parents
Yes.
are in Southampton, but
Yes.
you're not born yet. You say
Yes, I'm
you say-
born. Oh, yes, I'm born.
So, but you say they went. He went Macaulay in
29.
right.
Yes.
Oh, okay. And so that's when. But you were born in 33.
That's right.
So tell me about that.
Right.
Where were Harry and Hilda? Where did they meet? Where
Harry
did they marry?
Okay. I don't think they particularly want to know that. You may be right.
I do.
You do. Fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Right. Put me on.
You're on.
I was born on the 30th of March 1933. I don't know where my parents were living at the time, but my mother went home to Southampton, which is where she came from, to have me, and stayed there, I think, a few weeks. And then my father must have got a job there and came to live there. And we lived there until I was about 5. And then my father got a job in Newcastle, of all places. And we went to live in Newcastle. We lived there for about 9 months. And then he got the job in Bolton. Now, all he knew about Bolton was Bolton Wanderers. That really was it. And he said for the first 6 months, the people he worked with didn't understand him and he didn't understand them, because they had very thick accents at that time.
What was the job?
He was some sort of salesman. I went and became the only Jewish pupil ever at St Simon and St Jude's Church of England Primary School, where everyone was extremely nice to me and to my parents. When I first started, of course, the Yomim Narayim came very quickly in September, and of course my mother wanted me to take the days off, and she wrote to the headmaster. And the headmaster was absolutely charming about the whole thing, although I'm quite sure he'd never met a Jew before, knew absolutely nothing about anything, but they were wonderful. There was a small Jewish community in Bolton, about 25 families.
So if this is, you're in primary school,
Yep.
So the war's on.
Yeah, sure. And that's when Bubba came up, and Bubba and Zeta came up to stay with us. The Blitz was 1941. Effectively, that was the big Blitz, although there was plenty afterwards. And the girls came up and slept head to toe in the spare bedroom.
So what's that, Hetty and Lily?
Yes. And so I saw quite a bit of them. One lovely story. One thing about Zeta, he loved beer. And he loved pubs, which is probably where Rayful gets it from. It's hereditary. I never knew anyone of his generation who loved pubs. And he used to sort out the pub where he wanted to go, and it was in town. We lived about 2.5 miles outside town. In those days, there were no street lights. I'm talking about the war. There were no street lights. The buses were like once an hour. And he had found this pub in daylight and had decided that he wanted to go in the evening, much to my mother's horror. She explained to him very carefully, Father, she always called him Father, you get off the bus and you take the first left. Then you go down the street, and he said, Hilda, I found my way from Warsaw. It's a great, great response. Then I don't remember your parents' marriage, but I remember Lily and Joe's marriage, because some of Joe's nephews took Michael and I to, I think, somewhere like one of the London bridges. I think the do was in the East End. Uncle Sam paid for it because he had won the News of the World crossword, I think 500 or 750 pounds, which was a great deal of money in what must have been something like 1942 or 3. Joe was married in uniform. He was in the RAF regiment, he was sergeant. And Lily looked absolutely beautiful. And these cousins took us there and left me there. Anyway, eventually I managed to find my way back, I don't know how. And of course, it wasn't a London do unless I was sick. And I was very sick several times, only through overeating and gorging on the wrong stuff. Then I used to come to London later in my school holidays, the summer, because both my parents were working, and I think nicely they needed to get rid of me. And they wanted me anyway to see the family, which otherwise I wouldn't have seen. So, about 1945, the end of the war, maybe 1946, when I was 12 or 13, I used to go to London on my own. When you think of it now, it's absolutely impossible. I used to have a suitcase, and I used to carry it, and I used to go from Bolton to Manchester on the train. I used to go from Manchester to Euston, which was 6 hours in those days. I used to get off at Euston and go to the tube station and take the Piccadilly line to Wood Green. There I used to get the 629 trolley bus to which stopped right at the end of Park Avenue, Bush Hill Park, which was a very long street. I think it was about a mile from the bus stop to Bubba and Zada's house, which was in, I think, Woodall Street, and which was off Park Lane. But halfway along, Uncle Sam lived, and that was a lifesaver. And I used to drop into there, and they used to feed me, and were very good to me. And then I stayed in Bubba and Zada's spare bedroom. I used to get up early in the morning with Zada. Zada used to make me cheese on toast and spike up his tea, which he drank through a lump of sugar held in his teeth. And he talked and talked and talked, and we discussed things, the war, current affairs, some politics. He never learned to read and write English. His paper was the Yiddish paper, which came out, I think, once a week, and he used to go to Stamford Hill to buy it. And but he was an intelligent man. Why he never learned to do that, I don't know. But he didn't, and neither did Bubba. And they always spoke Yiddish at home, so Yiddish was my father's first language. And I learned a bit of it. And one of the things which was of interest was my father asked me, when I was a bit older, 13, 14 maybe, did Zada ever speak of Jack? Now, Jack had disappeared in the early mid-30s. Jack was too everything. He was too good looking, He was too charming. He was too slimy. He was too dishonest. And I think that he left London just ahead of the Boys in Blue. And he went as a deckhand to South Africa, and he quite liked it, and he stayed as a deckhand for years. You will have heard his story through Andrew and Anne. Rachel and I met his children in 20, what am I talking about? In 2015?
Oh no, it was longer ago than that.
Yes.
Yeah, probably 10 years ago.
Yes. Was it
so.
really?
I should think so.
Gosh. Right. Which is a strange story.
Yeah, you met your first cousin for the first time, didn't
That's
you?
right. That's right. But my father asked me if Zaid had ever mentioned Jack. And I said he never had. And I'd never mentioned it because it was obviously a very sore spot. My father was always very angry about it. I think he'd gone off with Bubba's housekeeping money or something like that. But strangely enough, the next time I went to London, he did talk about it. And he said to me he must be dead. Because if he wasn't dead, he would want to know whether we'd survived the Blitz. Ironically, of course, we found out many years later, 60 years later, that he had died in 1942 on a Russian convoy with a ship which I think was called the Narvik, but it went down with all hands in the North Sea. And there is a plaque about it apparently at Lloyd's in London, because it's very unusual for a ship to go down with all hands, for there not to be one survivor. But that's what happened. His wife, who was non-Jewish, married again and forbade the children ever to talk about anything Jewish, which they obeyed her until she died, and one or two of them became curious about it. Johnny was a charming furrier. He was a very, very nice man. He was married to the most beautiful woman. I thought she was a film star. She was of those sort of looks of Carole Lombard, that era of film star, and she really was beautiful. They had one child, who we always thought was a bit dim, Diana. And Sammy got married by sticking his then girlfriend, in the club, non-Jewish, but got married. And eventually she McGuired, although the McGuire was a bit iffy. So when Michael came to get married, they had to do all sorts of running about and payments. He had the children, Michael, I think Andrew and Martin. They carried on. Zayda wouldn't retire. Zayda used to go from the house to the station, and of course the train stopped yards from the shop. I talked to him about it, because I was a big shot in those days, because I was a solicitor. And he said, look, that shop is my medicine. While I'm working there, I don't need any medicine. And I'm happy doing it. It was a very strange business. He'd started knocking soles on shoes with a mouthful of nails and singing. He used to sing, "Oh, you beautiful doll, and you made me love you. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it." And I thought it was wonderful. And then he used to sell seconds. When I talk about seconds, my father used to say that a good pair was two left ones. Just women's shoes, and they all looked dreadful to me, even as a young boy. But he seemed to sell quite a few. And of course he set Joe up in business, though Joe did it on the market. But Zada took him to his suppliers and tutored him. And they all lived reasonably happy ever after. Bubba had a nasty stroke in the early 60s, may have been the late 50s. I was on holiday in Ireland at the time and I came back because it was a bad one and there was a chance that she wouldn't survive. But she did. But she refused to have any sort of therapy, and she was in a bad way and she was constantly depressed as a result. Zada was absolutely marvellous. For someone who'd never done anything but boil the kettle and make Try up his tea, he did everything, and everything for her, including changing her, taking her to the toilet, changing the bedding, the lot. It was absolutely marvellous, and I admired him. She died, and attached to this you'll find a receipt from the memorial people for her, Matt Saver. And he went to live with Lily, and then he came to stay with us for, I say us, my parents, for a few months. And then he would go back to London. And Hetty took over the shop. That's your mother. And I think, well, it wasn't exactly Harrods. She made a living, and she was quite happy doing it, because I talked to her about it. Because, of course, your father had died when you were very young. And I got on very well with your mother, well, with both your parents. Your father was a most charming man. And I was very sorry that whatever changes changed her into what you describe as a very virulent woman. I was very saddened by all that, and I'm sure you were too. So that's Zada. That's what I intended anyway.
So what we're looking at here, this is a memorial.
That's the map saver for Bubba, and that's the one for Zada.
Okay, take it. Yeah, take the top one away.
Finest Italian marble.
So these are your grandparents' gravestones.
Map savers, yes.
Right. And where are they buried?
Enfield.
Right. To the late David Cohen. So that was him. That was your. Okay. What else have we got? Hotel valuers, business and transfers, Westminster. What we're looking at here, Dad?
Looking at the purchase of 62 White Hart Lane. The one underneath sets it out better.
Okay.
61.
61 White Hart Lane.
Yeah.
Were they football fans?
No, no. And I never went to a match. I went to the ground to look.
And is there anything else here you want to...
No, that's it, I think.
What's this one?
Oh, those, yeah, those are what I want you to take. There's another one there.
David Cohen.
Yes.
So your I had no idea. I didn't even know he's my great grandfather. I didn't even know his name.
Yeah.
There he is.
Yeah.
Henry 1963. Did he do much? So what? This is his passport.
Yes. They never got naturalised.
Right.
So that's a laissez-passer.
All countries except Russia.
That's right.
Right, and there's nothing in it. No stamps.
No. I think there are for Bubba. What's the date of this?
Here, 1963.
Yeah, because that's when he died.
Oh, right.
That's when he died.
Right.
He was coming to Alex's bris.
Yeah.
And to Alex's pigeon ben, but he never made it. And I went to see him in South Tottenham Hospital. I'll talk about that.
Okay.
And this is Bubba's. That's Bubba's laissez-passer.
Wow, I don't think I've seen a photograph of her. So that's my great-grandmother.
Yes.
Excellent.
She was a very good-looking woman in her time.
Okay.
I don't know if you want any stamps, but she had a few.
Oh, great.
She had a few because she had a sister who lived in Paris.
Right. Okay, yeah, and there we go. So,
There you are.
There's Paris. Right. Hi Dennis, this is Rafe. I don't know if you've seen this. This is the family tree that was done up by this guy, David, when we met up in 2005. So you can see that's us. So that's Hilda and Harry's bit of the family, and that's your bit of the family there. So hopefully you can get some idea of this.
So there we are. That's it for the moment. Let me know what you think and what, if anything, you would like me to try and augment. Lots of love to you and Barbara. Bye.
Bye. See you soon. Bye. Bye.